Thank you. I wonder how many, this question is not something that you have to answer, but I do want you to think about it. I wonder how many of you in this audience would prefer not to be having the kind of sex that you're having. Perhaps it's a bit routine, maybe a bit boring, maybe a little bit dissatisfying, or maybe it's even painful. I also wonder how many of you might, in this audience, care less whether you ever had sex again if it weren't for perhaps how your partner might feel about it. Today, I'm here to talk to you about sexual desire. I'm a sex researcher, a sexual therapist, and I hope to leave you with some insights that might get you thinking a little bit differently about desire going forward. So what is low desire? Well, it's the number one presenting concern that people come into my practice complaining about. Typically, it's women, although I do see men with low desire as well, who are coming to me and describing that they just don't have interest in sex anymore. And for many of them, they might describe that this has resulted in a conflict in their relationships. For others, it might be more simply reflecting that they used to have more desire than they have now, perhaps when they were younger, or when they were in an earlier stage in their relationship, or maybe before they had kids, or before they went through menopause. The challenge with desire is that we live in this society that tells us that we should want to have sex whenever, wherever, at the drop of a hat, and that if we don't, that there's something wrong with us. The problem with desire is that there isn't a specific benchmark for how much desire is the right amount of desire. Is it low desire compared to somebody else? Is there perhaps a discrepancy in a relationship where one party has more desire than the other? So we don't have a specific benchmark or target to say that this is the right amount of desire. In fact, we don't know how much is enough. Maybe sometimes too much desire can also be a problem. And then I would also argue that our expectations might be a little bit unrealistic. So if we are socialized to think that desire is just this switch, it's this thing that just happens suddenly, it's almost like a lightning bolt coming out of the sky to strike you, what we're left with is this message that if that's not our experience, that there's something wrong with us. Where did we learn that? So for those of us who are lucky enough to have some degree of sexual education from school or perhaps from parents, we might have learned a few things about reproduction, maybe where babies come from, maybe how to prevent unwanted pregnancies, or to reduce risks related to sexually transmitted infections. But rarely did we learn about what pleasure is and what consent is. So for most of my clients who come to see me, they've learned about sex through media, through Hollywood movies, through cultural messaging, maybe through pornography as well. And have you really learned about how to make sure that you're going to have a pleasurable experience, that you and your partner are going to have pleasure, and that both parties are consenting to be a part of that interaction? So where did we learn about what makes for good sex? So I'm going to invite you to think about a time that sex was really good for you. So you might have to think back. Maybe it's a couple years, maybe it's more recent in your memory. Maybe it's a time where you were on vacation. Maybe it's even with a partner that's not the current partner that you have right now. And I want you to think about what made it good. So I'm going to give you a moment just to call up a memory. And what I typically find when I ask people to think about this is that I don't get responses like, it was this kind of sexual position, or it was that type of orgasm. What I typically get are responses that relate to how a person feels in that moment. So those details about who it was with or when and where might not be quite as important. So often the responses that I get to this question include things like, we both wanted to be there. We both enjoyed ourselves. My pleasure was important. I was important and prioritized and paid attention to. And sometimes I hear things like, I felt safe enough to be vulnerable with my partner and to really feel accepted for who I am. What do all of these things have in common? Well, they're all contextual factors. And I'm going to spend a bit more time talking more specifically about how important context is when it comes to sex and making sure that sex is good. So I'd like to share with you some of the research results, literature, that I have found particularly interesting in what helps to predict women's experiences of pleasure and arousal. Now, this literature is by no means exclusive to women. However, it has largely been conducted with cisgender women, but I do think it's relevant to many people as well that are not women. Also, it may not be representative of all women, but here are a few interesting facts. Did you know that women who are instructed to either self-pleasure or who are pleasured by a partner while they are in a PET scan are more likely to have an orgasm if they are wearing socks? Did you know that women are more likely to orgasm during masturbation than in any kind of partnered activity? In fact, research on the orgasm gap, over 20 years of research, has consistently shown that men are more likely to have orgasms than women when they are in straight partnered sexual encounters. As well, women who are in long-term committed relationships are more likely to have orgasms than women who are having hookup sex. We also know that women who are partnered with women are more likely to have orgasms, usually both parties reporting a much higher frequency of orgasms than couples who are straight. And we know that women who engage in kissing during their sexual encounters are far more likely to have orgasms. What this speaks to, again, is context. That long-term relationship, perhaps factors such as communication, safety, and familiarity promote women's pleasure and orgasm, as well as engagement in specific types of activities, the body parts involved, and the ways that they are stimulated, also promoting orgasm. So I'm going to tell you about a third set of research studies, originally conducted by Ellen Lan and expanded upon by Meredith Shivers at Queen's, where they brought women into the lab and they asked them to watch erotic visual stimuli. So they had a few different conditions, but the one that I'll tell you about here are heterosexual women who are watching erotic content of a variety of different conditions. So they had men and women who were engaging in sexual activity, women and women, and men. And in all of these contexts, women reported arousal response. And that they were having a response to the visual material regardless of that sexual orientation of the characters that they were watching. In fact, in Meredith Shivers' study, she also showed that monkeys having sex with monkeys was also erotically stimulating to women. Now, does that mean that women are attracted to monkeys? Probably not. What it suggests is that we are contextual beings who see erotic material on a screen and interpret that as something erotic is happening, and then have a response to that erotic material, often whether we want to or not. So all of those things that I just shared with you from the research literature all have context in common. I've alluded to the fact that we are contextual beings. What that means is that when we're in a situation, we look at what's going on and we evaluate the context before we engage in specific behavior. So we've had some discussion already about healthcare. When you go into your physician and you get a pelvic examination, you're not getting aroused. Let's be honest, that's the furthest thing from arousing. You might have found yourself in a public situation sometime where maybe you experience some degree of arousal or excitement, but you might inhibit that behavior and not engage in it in a public setting because you don't want to get in trouble or perhaps related to safety. Now, you may get into bed after a very long day at 11 o'clock with your partner, and you might find that arousing, or you might not. And that's probably normal if you don't find that context to be very stimulating. So I want to share with you 3 different contextual factors that can be really important in influencing your motivation and your willingness to be sexual, and also the outcomes of that sexual experience, whether you find it a good experience or not. So the first one is our environment. Now this speaks to the setting around you. Are you in your bedroom? Are you somewhere else? When you're in that room, is it a mess? Are there dirty socks all over the floor? Are there things that are going to be distracting to you? Are there sounds going on outside, or perhaps the dog is being really annoying? Do you have enough time? Do you feel like you're going to be too rushed, or you got to be out the door in 15 minutes? Or maybe at any moment you could be interrupted by your children or by someone else. Or are the curtains open or closed? So really looking at all of those different factors in that setting around you. And there could be things that would be maybe more facilitative of your experience. It could involve setting the mood, lighting candles, wearing specific clothing, having music on, those kinds of things. A second category are our personal reasons. Now, these are how we're feeling about ourselves in that moment. So perhaps you've eaten too much dinner and you're feeling a little bit bloated, or maybe you've had a glass too many of wine, or perhaps you're feeling a little bit depressed or a little bit anxious. You're struggling with those mood-related concerns. Or maybe you're just feeling kind of critical about your body or about yourself, or maybe you're really exhausted or really stressed. So again, you can think about how these factors can be influential in a positive way, but can also act as barriers that might decrease your motivation or decrease the likelihood that you enjoy yourself. So the third category here is relational, and this is how we're doing as a couple. So are you getting along well with your partner? Have you just had a disagreement? Or are you perhaps like two ships passing in the night? You haven't had any time to connect all week or all day, and now all of a sudden you're supposed to be interested in being intimate with them. So there are things that we can do to help facilitate connection or repair if there have been any conflicts or challenges in the relationship. So when we know about context, it empowers us to do things differently, to facilitate our interest and our willingness, and to make sure that our outcomes are going to be more enjoyable. So what's the big deal about sexual desire? We've hardly talked about it. I want you to think about how if actually the sex that we're having is just mediocre, it's not that great, then maybe it makes sense to not really want to have sex. We are rewards-based beings. When things are rewarding, we are more interested in engaging in them again in the future. And what I think is a bit of a challenge for this culture that has presented to us that we need to want sex in order to have good sex is that for those of us who maybe don't feel that way or don't feel that way all the time, again, it sets us up to think that there's something wrong with us. And on International Women's Day, when we talk about, for example, what has been more relevant in our climate in the last decade or so with the Me Too movement, it has been so important in recognizing violence against women. However, what I've seen is in some cases, in order to talk about consent, that people have gone so far as to say that in order to know that you've truly consented to be in a sexual experience, that you have to have an enthusiastic yes to your partner. So you're invited, and your enthusiastic yes must sound something like, yes, I'm thrilled to be involved. I can't wait. I'm so glad you've invited me to be part of this experience. The majority of women that I work with just can't imagine having that kind of a response to their partner. Their response might be something like, okay, sure, why not? Or, I think I could probably get myself in the mood. And what I'd like to suggest to you today is that is totally okay. as long as you are willing, genuinely willing, not coerced, not doing so because you feel like you have to, but willing, sure, I feel kind of neutral about it, but okay, that's actually totally fine. So what we're talking about is actually prioritizing willingness over desire. So if you don't start out in a sexual encounter feeling tons of interest and desire, and you start from more of a neutral place, hey, I'm willing, that can be so empowering because it sets up this expectation then that we can actually do something about. We can choose to engage without waiting for that lightning bolt to strike. So now that we've got that out of the way, maybe you're still unsure, but maybe you'll come along at some point and recognize that willingness can actually be far more influential than starting out with desire. So let's talk a little bit about what makes for good sex. I would argue that there are 3 things that are really important once you've looked at context in order to make sure that your outcome is going to be enjoyable and rewarding. The first is that you have to be open to it. Okay, so you have to be open to what you're doing. You can't just be checking the item off the box, okay, sure, gotta have sex this week. You can't be resentful, irritated with your partner, just doing it out of guilt or obligation. You have to be open and say, okay, and then you have to pay attention to it. So you can't just be mentally completing your checklist of things that you have to do tomorrow and just kind of hurry up and get it over with. You have to pay attention. And then you have to experience that sex as something pleasant or good in some way. There has to be some kind of reward attached to it. And so in that way, even if you're paying attention, but you're being kind of critical, like, this isn't the way that I used to enjoy it, or how come my partner can't do that instead, then that's obviously going to not make for a pleasant or pleasurable experience. So if we can keep these 3 things in mind, I also want to build on how do we make sure that we are more willing. And a really important component of willingness is examining why would we bother doing this at all anyway? What are our reasons for sex? So researchers at the University of British Columbia, led by Rosemary Besson, suggested a pretty revolutionary model of understanding why women have sex. And actually, the model is relevant, I think, for anyone who experiences sexual difficulty or doesn't feel a ton of spontaneous sexual desire. And what they've suggested is a couple of revolutionary things. One, that the starting point for sex may not actually be desire. It might instead be a reason. And that desire becomes more relevant once we're involved in our sexual experiences. So I want you to think about what are your reasons to have sex. And you might find that earlier on in your relationship, you had a whole different set of reasons than the reasons that you choose to engage in for now. And for a lot of folks, in the beginning of their relationship, they might engage in sex because it's novel, it's learning about your partner, it's understanding what they like and what you like. And in some cases, maybe it's even done out of insecurity. What better way to know that your partner's still into you if they just had sex with you? All things that may be less relevant in longer-term committed relationships. So here are a few examples of some reasons why people might choose to engage in sex. Maybe they want to experience pleasure, they want closeness and connection with their partner, they want to feel attractive or valued, maybe it's to relax or sleep better, and maybe it's more about a sense of empowerment or feeling like they're in touch with their femininity. And what all of these reasons have in common is that these are positive reasons or approach reasons or reward-based reasons. You can use different names to describe these. But in all of these cases, you stand to gain something when you choose to engage in sex. You're going to get something good out of it. So perhaps you're looking at this list and thinking, okay, yeah, maybe I do some of that sometimes, or maybe I used to engage in sex for a lot of those reasons. And there are so many different reasons to engage in sex. In fact, researchers at the University of Texas did a study with college undergraduates, and they asked them why they had had sex, what was the reason for it, for their most recent sexual encounter. And they had so many answers that they actually had 237 unique reasons. There was an entirely different class of reasons as well in their college respondents. And these are the reasons I tend to see most often when folks are coming to me with low desire. These are reasons which we call avoidance reasons. So people are trying to get a negative state to go away. So perhaps it's anxiety. If I don't have sex with my partner, they might start looking somewhere else. Maybe it's obligation or duty. It's been a certain number of days or weeks since I last had sex, so I better say yes. Maybe it's guilt, feeling like you're a crappy partner if you don't say yes. Or maybe it's managing your partner's mood. Oh, I can't reject them again. Or if I don't say yes, they're going to be a real grouch. So looking at those reasons, it's really important to recognize how these will actually facilitate or inhibit sexual desire. So I'm a realist. I understand that for many people, we might have a combination of these reasons that we choose to engage in sex for. And sometimes our reasons might actually be entirely avoidance-based reasons. And if that's the case, if you're somebody who wants to want sex more, then what I want you to know is the relationship between desire and engaging in sex for avoidance reasons. If avoidance reasons are working for you and you don't have a lot of desire and you don't mind, that's fine. But if you want to want sex, you want more desire, then you need to know that engaging in sex for avoidance reasons largely contributes to low desire. It undermines desire over time. So what's really important is that we recognize that we need to gain something from our sexual experience. We need to have rewards, and rewards overlap with these approach-based reasons. So if the only reason that you might say yes to a partner is avoidance reasons, and you want to have more desire, I would suggest actually that it'd be better to not have sex just for these reasons, and perhaps take a rain check and see if you can cultivate more reward-based reasons the next time that you try to have sex with your partner. So the other very novel thing that was introduced in Rosemary Bisson's work is the concept of two different types, at least two different types of desire: spontaneous desire and responsive desire. So we're already familiar with spontaneous desire, which is that lightning bolt. It's that, ooh, I'm really so interested, I can't wait. And what many people may find that they don't have or never have had a lot of spontaneous desire. And the model suggests that what actually might be more important and what might come first before choosing to engage in sex is not our desire to have sex, but our arousal. So in many cases, you might actually find that you need to become aroused or turned on before you actually want to have that sex. So the beautiful thing about this model is that it introduces a concept of responsive desire, that we can actually cultivate an interest by being in a sexual situation and responding to that sexual stimuli, just like those people in the lab who were watching that erotic content. So I want to leave you with a couple of ideas about cultivating responsive desire. So we know contextual factors are so important. And what that means is that those are all areas that we can manipulate or change to increase our interest and our desire. So that component of once you've started having sex and you start to realize, oh, this is actually pretty good. I'm having fun. I like this. Don't stop. That actually is more important than having any desire at the outset. So do you need to feel more connected with your partner? Do something about that. Make sure that you go for a walk or you have a talk or you do something rather than just expecting to connect through sex. Is the house a mess? Are there dirty socks all over the floor? If you're trying to engage in that activity, in that space, and you're just going to be distracted by a deterrent like the mess, ask your partner to help set that up so that it'll be less distracting for you. Do you need some time to yourself? Are you touched out? Are you sick of having everyone come to you and ask you for everything and you've been tending to them all day? Well, maybe you need a little time out to yourself. Go read a book, go have a bath, do something for you first before you're responding to your partner sexually. And maybe you need a little bit of a head start. So maybe you need some kind of stimuli. Maybe it's an erotic story that you read, or a fantasy that you think about, or that content we talked about earlier. And maybe you say to your partner, hey, give me a 10-minute head start, meet me upstairs, and I'll be a little bit more ready and interested. So the beautiful thing here is that these are all something that we have agency and autonomy over. We can do something to trigger desire rather than just waiting for it to hit us. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of take-home messages in summary. The first, and I think the most important thing, if you leave today with only one memory of what we talked about, is that there is nothing wrong with you if you don't experience spontaneous sexual desire. The second is that desire is entirely contextual. That's why we can't just take a pill to get interested in sex. We need to look at what's going on in the situation and do things to help facilitate our interest. The next is to cultivate willingness. Willingness over desire every time. And that there are different things we can do when we look at those contextual factors to make ourselves more willing. And lastly, to build more rewards, to build in more positive reasons so that you leave your experiences feeling like you gained something rather than you lost something or just made an ugly feeling go away. So I'll leave you with a little bit of contact information. I do have a booth upstairs as well. We're currently working on some knowledge translation efforts to answer people's questions and get that information out there in a blog. So if you're interested, stop by. You can enter your questions into our junior high school style question box and then come have a conversation with us. Thank you.